Mission Chats with John Crow.
Hello again, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to listen to this next episode of Mission Chats. I appreciate the listenership and the time you take to listen to this, and I hope that today's conversation will just bless you, encourage you, help you understand another facet of missions and how people are involved in that. So, Gary, that's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for reaching out and being willing to come and be a guest. As I always do, I want to just start us off and give you the floor, as it were, to share your story, how the Lord brought you to faith, and some of the things He's had for you on the adventure of life you've had so far.
Well, thank you, John. It's such a delight to be able to be here with you and to share God's story in my life. I'm so grateful that the small town in southwestern Kansas that I grew up in, there was a wonderful church there. And especially, it was very keen on bringing in ministers and pastors who loved the gospel and wanted to share Jesus very clearly with others. And so it was myself sitting in that church as I would hear Pastor Reimer, was his name, share the gospel week after week as a child. And in my childlike faith, I really felt Jesus inviting me, to come to Him and to recognize what He had done in my child eyes looking at it. And I remember praying and asking Him to forgive me of my sin and to lead my life. What was interesting about it, John, is that my family dynamics were interesting because my mom and dad had us in this church, but their relationship was very strained, and we had challenges because of many of their challenges, in a sense. By the time I was 12 years of age, even though I've come to Christ as a small child, I was finding my family just blowing up around me. And by the time I was 13, I really was kind of doing whatever I wanted to do. And that's not good. No matter if you're in a small town, big town, where by the age of 13, 14, if you're just out and about, nobody's asking you what you're doing. Anyway, I ended up finding older friends that really got me unfortunately, into alcohol. I mean, it's a small town. It was the one thing you could kind of get by in doing somehow, whether it was out at the lake or whatever, And so by the time I was in my latter teens, I found myself drinking way too much and even go to school sometimes, under the influence of alcohol heavily. My teachers knew I didn't have much going on at home, so graciously, they just didn't bug me because I wasn't like an angry person that way. Sometimes people are, but right. By God's grace, by the time I was 17 going on 18, I met a friend with an overseas student that had come to our school. I went over to see him in his country, and on my way back home in the plane, scriptures and songs that a wonderful grandmotherly figure by the name of Ruby had invested in me and helped me to learn when I was little. And she'd take me into her home, and it was kind of a really beautiful environment she'd put me in for a bit, but she would teach me God's word. And these words that Ruby and Pastor Reimer and my Sunday school teachers when I was little had invested in my head and my heart came back. And I was like, wow, especially it was a powerful verse, Revelation 3:15, 16, written to the church, but man, it just so hit me. I know your works, Gary. You are not cold or hot. It's like you found me as a child. I found you when you were a child. And you've just been living this life and this lifestyle and not pleasing me, not even really thinking about me. I don't want you to be living this middle ground lifestyle, because I pretended I would go to church, but honestly, John, I liked it, I think, because the girls were there. Okay, right. But anyway, I'm just saying the Lord met me on that plane, and I came back home, and what was so amazing was a man by the name of Stephen Shrimplin. He led different youth clubs out, throughout southwest Kansas where I grew up. And he took me under his arm and he said, I can recognize a calling of God on your life. And he got me to sharing my testimony and my story, because it's very real about a teenager who was struggling with alcohol and partying a lot, and he started having me share that. He got me involved in a thing called Young Preachers Club out of Kansas City, Youth for Christ. Sure. And it was in the middle of that God called me into ministry. I made a commitment to preach, pray, sing, or die for Jesus on a moment's notice. Okay. As you could tell, I'm still here. The only one I haven't had to do was, I've come close to dying a few times because of some different things, but I never have as of yet, so praise God. But it's a rescue story of God's redeeming grace in my own life. And so if anyone is listening is struggling, the Lord loves you so much, and He desires that you come back to Him and walk with Him and commit to serving Him with whatever talents and giftedness He gives you. And so just to wrap that up, from the time I was basically turning 18, I've been preaching and doing ministry. From the time I was 22, I've been in professional ministry, whether it's a form of a pastor, from youth and music to senior pastor. And now I've been involved in church planting for well over 25 years now throughout multiple countries.
Okay.
And so mostly in North America, but I've been in a few countries around the world as well, helping pastors, church planters.
Awesome. So I hear little twangs of a Canadian accent, and I know you mentioned that you spent some of your time up in the North America. Tell me a little bit about what the roles you've had there and why you've been in Canada.
Yes, so we were a part of a church plant just outside of Omaha, Nebraska, that I was learning from a wonderful church planting leader. His name was Andy Williams. That church sent me on a vision trip to Montreal, Quebec, to see if we could be involved in church planting. My heart broke with what I found there. You know, the Quebecois people were like 0.3% evangelical Christian. Like, it's like an unreached people group here in North America. And we were like, how can this be? And I called my wife, said, honey, I don't think we're just supposed to be here for a vision trip. I think we're supposed to be here and supposed to plant a church here and help the French Quebecers, Canadians begin planting churches amongst this people group. And my wife's such a missionary heart, John. She had a call in her life for missions since she was 16. And so it was an easy yes, even though she was pregnant with our third child. When we moved to Canada, we went with tons of faith. We had no idea really what we were getting ourselves into, in a sense. But we started that church. There was a group of people that were gathering. They were looking for a church planter then to move it forward. And so we were able to do that. And by God's grace, somehow, in His kindness, we helped start French churches reaching Quebecois people. And people then saw that I seemed to have an acumen for this, or ability to help others plant churches. Next thing I know, I was given a job with the North American Mission Board in Eastern Canada for overseeing church planting, which was the eastern half of the second largest landmass nation in the world. It wasn't certainly the largest amount of people, but it was massive land. And so we started planting churches from Newfoundland, which is the easternmost portion of North America. And that time it was all the way to Western Ontario, which included Toronto. But then I had roles where I was national missionary, serving all across Canada. But we were planting in churches in rural spaces, city places, way out places with First Nations people. Started planting churches with the nations, all kinds of people groups from India, Africa. And just God kept teaching me how to be a missionary. And there's a couple stories in there I'd love to tell you about how He really began equipping me to be a servant-hearted missionary towards all these peoples and people groups. So we were able to work with church planters, a few hundred of them, then raise them up, equip them. It was a pretty exciting time serving across Canada. Now I'm actually back in Canada again, now in Alberta.
Yeah, just for a visit, I think.
Well, actually, now I'm serving two groups. So, I'm helping with planting back in Canada again, and also helping serve in New England at church planting. So
awesome. And we'll definitely get to that in just a moment. But you also mentioned a couple of other countries, and both of those are sort of near and dear. You mentioned Liberia, and I grew up in Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, right next door. So I remember during some of their struggles as a country, we had some Liberian refugees come across, and just some memories there as a child. And then Cuba, we have a partnership there as well currently from our church. And so had the privilege, the blessing to go and visit that country a couple of times and just serve alongside them. Of course, right now, Cuba's in a very difficult place. And so we're navigating how we can help from a distance to try and relieve some of those struggles in their society right now. But yeah, so I don't know if you want to share just a snapshot maybe of how your involvement was in both of those countries.
Yes, well, I was working with a missions group called Pillar Missions that had multiple churches and schools, and then a medical clinic in Liberia as well. And that was just quite an awesome ministry to see how this country is still recovering from the internal war because there was just so much damage and so much devastation. The thing that blew me away, John, though, about working with the Liberian people is that even in the middle of that, the majority of people, when I would preach in churches there, a lot of them didn't even know where their next meal was coming from. And yet there they were with such joy, anticipation, excited to hear from God's word, and such a desire to honor him and serve him, and just some incredible pastors that would serve in very challenging places that, would flood out or just whatever the case was. And they'd have so little and so appreciated any little gift of, buying some, 10 plastic chairs for them or whatever the case was. They were so, so gracious. And going to places like that on mission is so significant for people, because it just makes you realize, the fact that we can drive through McDonald's and buy a Big Mac is like, most people in the world can't do these kind of things.
Sure. Yep.
One, they don't have the money, but two, it's just not their life and lifestyle. They're just saying, Lord, if you could allow me to have my next meal, maybe tomorrow, that would be fine.
Right.
It's like, oh my goodness, you appreciate so much. But then also just learn how to, identify with others. One key thing the Lord taught me in Liberia, that I kind of knew this missionary principle, but what happens many times in countries is missionaries come in and they realize you have a lot, right? But you can either live like you have a lot while you're there or not. John, I've ridden motorcycles most of my life, right? And you've been in Africa and Côte d'Ivoire, right? And you've seen how crazy the motorcycle thing is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So I told them, I said, I want to ride the motorcycle taxi. They said, no, 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 no. I said, that's what all the people do. Right. It's okay. Now they said, well, we're not going to let you ride in the city, which I was actually kind of glad for that. That was pretty crazy. We actually had a couple of them hit us. We're just driving around. It's just normal for them. Yeah. Just oh, sorry, they don't even say sorry. It's just normal, But out in the country, I got to ride into the communities in the bush. And when they saw the white man riding into the bush on the taxi, one of them said to them, he said, you're like us. I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus. It just allowed me to have an extra grace with them, but we can live like that and lead like that in a sense and serve like that. And it really gives you greater inroads with people.
Yeah. 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 And how about Cuba? What was your connection to that beautiful country?
Yeah. So when I was pastoring a church here in the province of Alberta that I'm sitting in right now, we had a partnership as well with Cuba, and we were serving them. But one of the most precious things I was able to do is I'm also a trainer with an organization called DCPI. It stands for Dynamic Church Planting International. And we asked the Cuban Baptist group that we were with there at that time, and said, would you like us to train pastors in how to plant churches? And they said, oh, yes, we would love that. So they bust in about 40 pastors that came to this church planting essentials training that I did with DCPI. There, and I had a translator, of course, because my Spanish is un poquito. And so this guy was one of the best translators. He was fiery, man. We had a blast together training these pastors. But what was amazing is we came out of this training, and these 40 pastors, we always ask, what do you envision God is asking you to do out of this training? Because we don't want to give people information. We want to see how the Lord's speaking. And they estimated that out of that training, that between the 40 of them, they would plant around 240 new churches, And I thought they were talking about how they would go up into the hill country and take a mule or something up there with some Bibles or something, and like just these ways that these people who have literally nothing, again, in that culture, they hardly have anything, appreciate anything you do for them. They're going to pay a price, to advance God's kingdom and go to places where they know, well, maybe I'm not going to eat for a couple of days or whatever the case may be, but the Lord will sustain me. I'll be fine. And that was just a beautiful experience with these people. One other thing there, John, that happened is I said, would you take me where the average North American, whoever's visiting Cuba, doesn't go? Right. That's where I want to go.
Okay.
For one, it was awesome because there was beautiful beaches all around Cuba, and there were just these most glorious shells sitting around. I mean, that's not the real big purpose, but I was blown away by that. But then what happened was the men were sitting around at these outdoor bars that are there, right? But it's all outdoors. There's a little stand where you buy the beer or whatever. And I said, could we go meet those people over there? My Cuban missionary. He's like, you want to go? Yeah, I want to be like Jesus. I mean, I still have a long ways to go, but I thought he would go and hang out on that patio right there. And so we got to start sharing the gospel, and all these people just started gathering around. One, because they weren't used to seeing people like me there. Right. So they're like, that's interesting, But then we got to share, and the majority of them had never heard a clear gospel message because people just didn't go there. Sure. These small rural Cuban villages, and then sat out at the bar, with some of the people are intoxicated a bit, But man, it was amazing how the Holy Spirit gave some of these people clarity to understand the gospel through the translator. And finally, my translator said, do you mind if I finish and close this off? Because I think these people really do want to receive Jesus. And I said, I think without the translation, it'll just help. I said, go.
Yeah.
The Cuban missionary that we were working with finished sharing the gospel. Many prayed to receive Christ.
Wow.
And then the Cuban missionary was going to be able to follow up with them. But it was just awesome. But that was part of my Cuban experience. Yeah.
For sure. No, super exciting to hear that. That's wonderful. And I think you're right. Often folks like that are the ones least reached in a sense, because people are either scared of them or think there's no potential there or whatever it might be. So that's really neat to hear that story. So I want to shift gears and just give you a chance to tell us about your current ministry focus. Obviously, as you've shared a bit of your life journey, definitely a strong emphasis on church planting. And so I know that's where your focus is now, but yeah, tell us more about what you're doing.
Yeah, so I noticed, John, these statistics aren't nearly as broadly spread as you think that they would be, but the North American church, whether it's Canada or the United States, honestly, it's just dying at a rate unlike we've ever seen before. I saw a report just come out from Axios, even in the United States last year, saying that 15,000 churches closed.
Wow.
And I'm like, 15,000, like nobody's talking about that number.
Mm-hmm.
But it was from Axios, and it was actually reported from Boston University. I'm like, okay, so I mean, it's not like these are uncredible sources in a sense, but I wanted to do even more of a deep dive into that. But what that did is it really caught my attention. It made me realize that we are experiencing maybe some death in the North American church, unlike what's seen before. And then in Canada, too, there was a statistic that went out that 10,000 church buildings in the next 10 years are just going to be totally closed and not be used for anything. Many of them torn down. Their real estate's going to be used for other things. And that's a lot of churches. We have some denominations in the United States, like the largest denomination in the United States in the last few years has lost millions of people.
Right.
And like, no one's talking about this. So I'm like, there's been a sense in my mind and my heart and others too, that we've got to make shifts or else we're just going to see this continued decline.
Right.
Now, some of these churches, the reason they died is they lost their mission, right? So it wasn't like there was a gospel presence there, maybe even for a few decades, and the churches kept dwindling. But some of it's not so. This one large denomination has lost so many people. I mean, I think they really love the gospel. It needs to be a clarion wake-up call, you know?
Right.
And so really my passion in church planting was like, how do we make the shifts that are needed so that we can just get into addition? You know, people in church planting world love to talk about multiplication, but honestly, we're in subtraction in North America. And so not only in church planting, but how many people are dying and are lost without Christ? We see so many more people die in Canada and the United States without Christ than are being saved. And so even with all the resources, all the churches, all the things that we have here, how can that be?
Right.
So in our church planting environment, we've made a lot of shifts with my work in New England with the Christian Missionary Alliance. And now I'm actually just beginning to start to serve the Church of the Nazarene in Canada. I'm actually doing both fronts right now, which is great to plant churches in 3 provinces in Canada. But really, we must make some radical shifts. And really, that's a big part of my story, what I'm trying to tell people. These shifts are radically needed. And actually, Jesus has already modeled for us. It's not Gary Smith's idea. I'm trying to practice his ideas. And I think if we can get back to that, we could actually see a great movement in North America once again, even like the Great Awakening.
You know, that's encouraging to hear what you are doing. And yeah, even those statistics, I'm not fully aware of all of that. So kind of staggering to hear that. I'd love to come back to methodology and some of what you're seeing is working, but I just want to give you a chance to share a couple more stories where you've seen God at work through your ministry, through your lifetime.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a Canadian story and I'll tell you a U.S. story. Let's go to Canada first. I actually tell this story in my book, but I changed the name, and so I'm going to be careful with some of the details even on the podcast here.
Sure.
But I was over in Eastern Canada, met a guy at a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I'm sitting across the table from him, and that's even funny that there's a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Fredericton. But anyway, there is, or was anyway. And so he and I were sitting across the table, and his hands literally, John, are trembling. I'm thinking, wow, does he have some kind of disease or what's going on? And he said, Gary, I'm just so nervous. I'm like, well, why? He said, well, I think God's calling me to plant a church in such and such community. He said, Gary, there's so many drugs there. And he said, can you envision me taking my family? He has this really young family, these young kids, and put them in the middle of that. I said, well, how about this? next time I'm visiting you, let's drive up there and prayer drive and prayer walk together through the town. And we'll just ask God. So we did that. 2 or 3 weeks later, we went up there to this community and we were driving around and like, John, I haven't seen that many drugs out in the open in the inner city. I was blown away by this small community that had so many drugs in it. Well, anyway, he moves there and we're praying for him. And he said, Gary, half my day, I'm just going to go out sharing the gospel. My other half of the day, I'll be doing, work for the new church we're going to start, but the other half of the day, and then I want to equip other people to do that too. And sure enough, that's what he did. He went up and down the valley, home to home, and just started sharing the gospel. So we're now several years down the line, right, from this.
Yep.
And literally, you go to that town, you can't really find drugs anymore.
Wow.
And there literally are hundreds of people in that entire region that have come to Christ. I mean, there's not like thousands and thousands of people there, but they have heard the gospel multiple times, and hundreds of them have been saved. There's a bridge across a beautiful river there where the townspeople would come out and stand on that bridge and watch these people, like 20, 30 people at a time just be baptized in this beautiful, very cold Canadian river. Well, I'm just saying it was just awesome to see the calling of God and him trembling over this calling, moving his family there. Even there was one night he called me in the middle of the night where they were people that were getting out of drugs and drug dealers, different things. There's a guy that was there with a sawed-off shotgun going to kill him and his family. He was right there on his porch, and God rescued him and rescued his family. And it's just an incredible story. There's great transformation there in this community now, all because of the gospel.
Right.
Anyway, it's a very awesome story.
That's fantastic.
One of the plants that I'm working with currently is in New Hampshire. It's in the top 5 most unreached states currently in the United States.
Yep.
And so this church planter 25 years ago was a practicing witch. He has incredible testimony. You meet him, and he's all tatted up, everywhere, big long beard. And, I've worked with bikers and starting biker churches and stuff, and he's the epitome of that. That's what he looks like, and it's awesome. But this guy, they had such a calling and are starting to see a great little harvest in this area of the Green Mountains of New Hampshire. And of course, they're under there's pressure there because there's witch covens and different things, that are acting against them. But greater is he that is within us than he that's in the world, right? And he's a shield about us, the glory and the lifter of our hands. So we can be fine in the middle of that environment, but we just need to know there's some serious spiritual warfare going on in lots of places, even in New England. But man, we're seeing a harvest there. They have 4 teams of prayer driving teams that go around the region. They pray, they get out of their cars, talk with people, minister to people, share the gospel. It's incredible what they're doing. And I'm actually asking him to invest in some of our other church planners now in New England and share with them about what he's doing, because honestly, they're just doing what the Lord's asking them to do, is to minister to people very directly, one-on-one. Jesus showed us with all these 60 plus different interactions he had with specific people that either connected with him or he connected with them. He showed us how to relate to people, and his planter and some of our other planters are doing it too. Like we have a church plant in Salem, Massachusetts, where there are more practicing witches today than there ever were back in the Salem witch trials. Like it's much more real today. There's a Church of Satan right there that's pretty prominent in the community. And they talk about how nice and kind, Satan is and how you should get to know him. It's incredible, the spiritual warfare that's taking place in that place. But we're planting a church right there and seeing some pretty awesome things happen. Praise God for that. But this is a couple of stories of some planters that are working in kind of some special people that God called out that maybe many of us would need to relook 1 Samuel 16:7 about how the Lord looks on the heart, not the outward appearance. A trembling guy shaking, but it reminds us of the story of Gideon, right? Oh, that mighty warrior, Anyway. But yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And just really encouraging to hear and see what God's doing. And like you said, places you might not expect it to be taking place. As we circle back a little bit to how you've approached church planting, one of the things in some of the content I was reading talks about the 3 L's of evangelism. So I'd love for you to expand on that for me and for our listeners. And I'm curious what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Just briefly, so I was heading to a First Nation community in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Okay.
And my first time to meet them and to really engage with First Nation people at this level. And the Spirit of God told me very clearly, and it's one of those things where you double check and triple check, Lord, did you really tell me this? Johnny said, when you get there, don't speak. I'm like, what? So I'm like, okay, all right, Lord, I got to say something. Like, it's not like I can't say anything. Yeah, I understand. Niceties, yes, but don't talk. Okay, so I get there. I kind of got lost in this First Nation community that I found where I was supposed to go because everybody knew who I was going to visit. So I went to meet a First Nation man called Robert Buck. But anyway, the Spirit had told me don't speak, so I just used just a few words, and he invited me into his home. And for 2.5 days, John, I pretty much didn't talk.
Wow.
After sitting with him, not understanding First Nation culture. I mean, I just didn't. I didn't know it, right? He said, Gary, I'll work with you.
Okay.
I said, oh, thank you. Thank you. Why do you want to work with me? And he said, you're the first white man who listens.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's where the 3 L's really came from. And it started out with just 3 L's meaning one word. And that stood for, in real estate, they say location, 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 right? Or the 3 L's.
Yep.
Well, I said the 3 L's of evangelism started out as listen, listen, listen. And then I started morphing them into other ideas of 3 L's as well, just because it's easy to remember. But that was the foundation of where it began. And I say that the key to evangelism is not necessarily just knowing what to say. We're normally always taught what to say.
Right.
But you need to learn to listen to the Spirit. How is he prompting you in this time? You need to learn to listen to the heart of the person. Jesus showed us this, right? It's not like we're talking about something he didn't do, but he showed us this is where you're going to dive in. This is the angle to take because of where this person is at, and they need to listen to the culture. Like in that Swampy Cree culture in Manitoba, where I was at, their language didn't have a word for forgiveness.
Okay.
And so I asked my First Nation brother there, Buck, I said, so teach me.
Right.
How do you communicate the idea of forgiveness without having the word or the idea of that in the culture?
Yeah.
And he would teach me and share with me illustrations and stories to use. And just like, but the whole idea of the 3 L's is listen, listen, listen. It can be locate and lean into the gospel. There's all kinds of ways to take the 3 L's, but that's the heartbeat behind it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I think just a great message for evangelism, definitely. Well, I'd love to give you some space now just to share kind of how you're approaching church planting. I know you've seen things that aren't working, and you've been led to maybe take a little different approach in some of those areas. So just, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we approach potential church planters quite differently. Because since I moved to New England, I was helping with church plant. I said, look, I said, you need to know, I don't want to use traditional church planting assessments. I mean, there's a lot to value about them. So don't hear me dissing them from the sense that they don't have some value, okay? But I think they have greatly squelched movement. If we want to see a shift and get on the other side of this downward decline that we talked about, we've got to do things differently. And so how has Jesus shown us to do things differently? Well, what did he do? We watch him. He approached these misfits as him being like a teacher and a rabbi, which the rabbis and teachers didn't do that in his culture, for one. And these young men particularly would try to find a leader and beg them if they could follow them. So Jesus turned that upside down anyway, right, for the culture. But then who did he choose? He chose fishermen,
right?
The taxmen. Like, are you kidding me? The most hated person in the Jewish culture of his day. He turns all these things on his head. Like, he brings ladies into the group and has them a part of the group as well, where they didn't have that with other teachers in Israel.
Right.
Like, there's so many interesting things that Jesus did that were so unique. And so when we're looking for church planters, like in our work in New England and what we're going to do in Canada, we're not using traditional assessment systems to say, oh, you have all these 9 to 12 characteristics that we're looking for that make for a successful church plant. What we do is we say, we're going to build into you the qualities and characteristics that you need to be able to minister and to reach people in Jesus' way. So we call them out by saying, let's follow Jesus, follow him, and fish for people. And this is the first step that I want to assess in a potential leader, that they want to do that. But we bring them in as a church planter and them knowing this is what we're doing. Because even you look at church planting in North America now, there's been less baptisms, less salvations than there used to be. Back when Peter Wagner, back in the 90s, I think he had said that church planting was the most effective form of evangelism. Well, it's become less and less effective because it's become so professionalized. We need to get away from the professionalism of it and get back to the Jesus way of it. And so that's what we're looking for. And that's really helped us, John. It's really helped us because there's all kinds of people I can call into the initial stages of this. It's really what any committed Christian ought to be doing anyway. But discipleship is lacking in this part of it. The whole idea that Jesus came to seek and save that which is lost, Luke 19:10. John, if someone deeply loves Jesus, they're going to know lots of lost people, and they're going to be in the middle of them. In this little small community I'm in, I found 2 lost people, and I've just barely been here, that I know their names, and I'm praying for them, and I'm looking for my next time of hanging out with them.
Yeah.
This is Jesus' way. It's not Gary's way. It's not an evangelism strategy. It is the life and the lifestyle of a serious Jesus follower. And so I want to see this being in our church planters, and it's allowing us to see a greater amount of harvest in our church planting. Our planters are telling me weekly of stories of people getting saved, born again, Nicodemus stories. And this is the Jesus way. And if we can help church planting get back to this rather than having them have to have all of these things before you call them out, like I'm just saying, it can get us so much further. The Lord of the Harvest is preparing all kinds of people like this for us to call out. But we need to get back to doing that again the way Jesus did it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very encouraging to hear how you're doing that. And like you said, yeah, we should all be doing that as followers of Jesus. That's what he calls us to. And yeah, so a little convicting as well. It's easy to, in professional ministry, kind of tuck away and not be out in the world sometimes. So yeah, just a good word there. As we sort of bring this in for a landing, what advice would you give to people who are hearing this, wondering, how the Lord might be moving them into full-time ministry or part-time ministry, or even like you've just been sharing, just being a witness in their community? I don't know if there's anything particular that comes to mind.
John, I want to speak to everyone in your audience, especially a younger generation, though, that might be listening to this, just that I have heard many young men particularly that have said that they don't feel called to be a pastor, for example. And fewer and fewer people are going to our schools, our seminaries, Bible colleges to come into pastoral ministry. So let me just share something with you. When you go at it the way that Jesus has called us to go at it, I think it might call you and cause you to relook at the call to ministry. Mm-hmm. Because maybe you've said, I don't want the experience that I've known such and such pastor to have, or I don't want this experience of this kind of a church. What I'm saying is let Jesus walk you into his way. Yeah. Because I think that you would love his way. So we don't need a CEO mentality in leading churches. We need a Jesus mentality. We need the mind of Christ dwelling in us richly. And as that mind is leading you into ministry, it may not allow you to get a position in a CEO-type pastoral role, but what it will allow you to do is to either get involved in church planting, again, doing it Jesus' way. And not that pastors aren't doing it Jesus' way, but I'm just saying there's a lot that we've put into the church that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that it goes. If you follow Jesus' pattern and his ways of leading in his kingdom, I think that you would say, I'll do that. I want to do that. I could be called into that, because his whole way of ministering is super exciting. It's super challenging. It'll push you to the hilt to minister his way, because he said, I put the towel over my arm and I serve. And he even said, no greater love has any man than this. He lay down his life for his friends. So it's a constant life laying down, but I'm just saying, it is super exciting to go about it his way. And so if you'd like to touch base with me about that sometime, you're listening to this, I'd be happy to talk with anyone in your audience, John, about what that looks like. It is laid out in my book. This isn't a sales pitch for my book. I'm happy for people to buy my book, but I'm just saying it shows this pathway of saying, okay, how do I follow him? How do I multiply disciples? How do I build out groups of people that can do that with me? How do I scale that out? And then how do I live in Acts 1:8? That's the model I teach in the church planting pathway that I just gave you there. It's now beginning to be translated in multiple languages because it's designed to be simple. Mm-hmm. When you work with people, things get more complex very quickly than you want them to. But if our systems at least can be more on the simple side, we can see things move. And so, but that'd be my advice and counsel, John. Let's get into the Gospels, read through them. What did Jesus do? Mm-hmm. Do that.
Yeah, that's great. Simple in one way, but that's what we're called to do, follow him. So you've mentioned the book a couple of times. It's called From Dying to Dangerous, and I presume that's available on the usual channels for getting books. Is it available ebook and audiobook at this point, or print only?
It's available every way now, and my publisher invited me to be the voice of it. Just went out like 3 weeks ago. I
Yeah.
think it went live. It's called From Dying to Dangerous. Yeah, by Gary Smith.
Awesome. So if people want to continue hearing your voice and reading your own book, then that's a great way to experience it too. But yeah, just to my listeners, encourage you to check that out as well. Gary, I thank you so much for making the time to do this. Like I said before we started, just always a huge blessing to me to hear people's stories. And that's part of the reason why I do this little podcast. And so thank you very much for taking this time.
Oh, you're welcome, John. Thank you. Thank you for your ministry. May God bless it.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Mission Chats. As always, I would love for you to share it with your friends and get it out there a little wider for me. This is just a side project that I do somewhat for my own benefit, hopefully for the benefit of those who listen as well. So you can find links to do that in the show notes, and also you'll find links to some of the ministries Gary's involved with and his book as well. So thanks again for listening.
Find us online at missionchats.com.